back in '84, after seeing Twisted Sister on Friday Night Videos, I asked my parents for three things. I wanted a guitar, I wanted an amp, and I wanted a pair of aviator sunglasses.
Oh, so in other words, you wanted to replace me in the witness protection program.
Pretty much. So I got a Westone Electra Blue Burst guitar, I got a PV Audition 20, and I got the Aviators. But since the Aviators are long gone, since then I haven't put down my guitar, and I'm 47 now. So it is a super pleasure, man, to talk to you like this.
Well, thank you. Don't we all have stories about what it is that made us do what we want to do? You know, I mean, my first rock concert that I ever went to, I just connected some historical dots to this particular description. But a neighbor of mine who was a couple years older than me, so this is 1966, I was 14 and he was 17. So the Animals, who had House of the Rising Sun, and that was the first, basically, that was a number one song. It was one of the first British invasion bands to have a number one song after the Beatles hit. Most people think it's the Rolling Stones, the Dave Clark Five, and it wasn't. It was the Animals. He took me to see the Animals at a concert in Central Park, and in those days, the tickets were $1. Okay? Yeah. The Schaefer Festival tickets were $1. And that's if you want to sit in the balcony. If you want to sit in the front, it was $1.50. Okay, so he takes me to the concert, and it was August 3rd, 1966. And why would that really matter historically? The reason why that would matter historically is because after that show, Chaz Chandler was taken by Keith Richards' girlfriend down to the Cafe Wha to see Jimi Hendrix for the first time. So that night, which August 3rd, 1966, was the night that Chaz Chandler saw Jimmy play at the Cafe Wha, and he decided he was going to sign Jimi Hendrix to a management contract and take him to England. And, of course, the rest is history. So here I am, 14 years old, seeing the Animals, not realizing, of course, that that very night was the night that changed the world in a way, because he saw Jimmy. So that kind of puts that in context. And as you point out, you saw my thing and wanted aviator glasses and blah, blah, blah. And, and I either see the Beatles on TV or whatever, and I want that. So it always is the thing that sparks, something sparks it. Although I never cared, I love the Beatles, but never cared to own any of the guitars they own, nor did I care about playing their songs. So it wasn't until the blues bit me in 1966, 67, and then I said, I need to get a Fender Telecaster because Mike Bloomfield from the Paul Butterfield Blues Band is playing a Telecaster, and it's on the back of the album cover. And at that point, I was selling weed a lot, so I was making a lot of money. But also, to be fair, the price of new gear was cheap. So a brand new Telecaster was $135, and so most guitars were a couple $100, most in those days. Right. Amplifiers were $300, and and then the tickets to the shows that we would all go to see were $1 or $2 or $3 at the Fillmore, and so you could see Zeppelin and the Who, and the tickets were $3. In fact, the tickets were $3, $4, and $5. So you can imagine this, okay? You could see Led Zeppelin, you could see Rod Stewart, Jeff Beck, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin, Country Joe, Crosby, Stills and Nash, The Who, whatever, and the tickets were $3, with $3, $4, and $5. And if you couldn't, and if you couldn't afford that, you saw them at the Schaefer Festival in the park, where the tickets were $1. And when the tickets went up to when Bill Graham raised the price by 50 cents, so the tickets were $3.50, $4.50, and $5.50. There were riots on Second Avenue.
Well, I read that in Bill Graham's Graham's book, where he talks about that. And
yeah, it's 100% true.
And what was so funny is that you're mentioning all this. So I'm actually a big Deadhead myself, and kind of discovered them in the 90s, and have since been a huge fan. So I grew up a metalhead, became a Deadhead, stayed a metalhead, and kind of found myself in this whole this expanded universe where, you don't realize how boxed in you are as a music fan until you hear something else that is generally outside of, your norm. And so one of the things I heard you talk about a lot was going to the Fillmore, and seeing the Dead and, Paul Butterfield and things like that. Like, at that time, like, while you definitely you don't sound like the Grateful Dead, was the Grateful Dead or bands like that somewhat of an influence on you as a musician at some point?
Well, I had, when I read about the Grateful Dead in a magazine article on a magazine called Ramparts, and they did a thing on the San Francisco Sound. So it was the Dead, the Airplane, Moby Grape. Mm-hmm. It was all that. And so as soon as I heard the Dead were playing in New York at the Fillmore, I wanted to go see them. Now, they opened for Janis Joplin the first time I saw them. Mm-hmm. People have no concept of what the Grateful Dead are as an opening act, because you just figure the Grateful Dead play for, 100,000 hours. Right. You can't imagine the Dead play 40 minutes, can you? You can't.
No, not at all.
So I went to see them, and they opened for Janis Joplin, and they played 40 minutes, and I was very disappointed because all they did was tune up and said goodnight. I mean, they kind of walk out on stage and they jerk around, and and I took acid to see them, and by the time the LSD hit, they said goodnight, and I was disappointed because I was waiting for this like 6-hour thing, which of course made no sense because I knew they were an opening act, so I didn't even know what I was thinking. But they came back again a couple of months later, and again I went to see them. And again, they were opening for Country Joe and the Fish. And again, I took acid. And again, as the acid hit me, they said goodnight. Mm-hmm. I met Bob Weir years, not long ago. And I kidded with him. I said, God, I saw you guys as an opening act. And all I remember is you tuned up and said goodnight. And he went, yeah, that's about right. Like, he didn't really argue the point with me, because he couldn't even imagine what it was like to do a 40-minute opening set. But when they played with Country Joe, the Country Joe said, you people in New York have never seen the Grateful Dead as a headliner, so tomorrow night I'm going to let them close, and that's what they did. So they went on stage. I don't know what time it was, but they ended at 4 a.m, and I had seen God, and it was the greatest thing. So yeah, I was a huge Deadhead and saw them 27 times with Garcia and with Pigpen. To give you an idea how long ago that was. So
right.
From 69 to 72, I saw them 27 times, and. But when the glam thing hit me, I was transitioning from a hippie to a glam guy, and that basically happened in a 30-day period of time in September of 72. It changed my life, and I really looked in the mirror and said, why do I want to look like that? I want to look like Mick Ronson.
Right, right.
So that was the whole thing. And so I cut my hair, dyed it blonde, and became a gigantic Bowie, Lou Reed, Mott the Hoople fan, and what that did was they completely walked away from the Grateful Dead. I mean, 100% just kind of said, you know what, this is not me. But we all have these legitimate backgrounds. So, but then I went through an enormous transformation where I walked away from the Dead and drugs completely, like completely, just became so anti-drugs and anti. I went from being a drug addict and a drug dealer to being the most anti-drug person on the planet, just because I decided to, not because of not because I went to AA or went to, whatever. I just woke up one morning and went, you know what, I better stop because I'm going to die. And so I stopped, and I never went back. And that happened in one day, basically.
So kind of to backtrack a little bit, a friend and I had this conversation. We were talking about influences, like musical influences. And one of the arguments that we were having was, like, if I said somebody was an influence on another band, he would be like, that can't be because they don't sound anything like them. But then my argument was, well, JJ French was an influence on me to pick up a guitar. I still consider you an influence, even though I play roots rock music. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't play, metal or anything anymore. So in your opinion, is it still possible to be an influence on someone and not sound like them?
Well, I'm not a metal guy. I play in a band that plays metal, but that's not me.
Right.
You know, I mean, Twisted started out as a Bowie, Lou Reed kind of band, and yes, I was that. But I started out as a blues guitar player and remain one. And if you want to talk about roots rock, I mean, my favorite band is The Band.
Oh,
And it doesn't get much more authentically roots rocky
they are
than them.
up there.
You know?
They are
I mean,
up there with
the
me.
Band.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I say The Band and the Beach Boys are probably the two greatest bands that America ever produced. And I have a whole argument about that because there's a lot of great bands for sure. But if you look at the Mount Rushmore of rock bands, you've got the Beatles, Stones, Who, Zepp, Floyd, Queen. That's what I think is the Mount Rushmore of rock bands. And I mean, maybe you could throw in Black Sabbath if you're a metal guy. But the thing is, you got Beatles, Stones, Who, Zepp, Floyd, Queen. And that's a fucking... But what's the problem with that description is they're all British. Right? They're all British. So where's the American? Great band. Not good bands. There's plenty of good ones, but great transcendent bands that alter the music universe, right? So I'm thinking, and I'm coming up with The Band, and I'm coming up with the Beach Boys, and there's arguments you can make against that. I mean, The Band didn't sell mega billions of records,
Right.
Okay,
Right.
but they certainly, without The Band, you wouldn't have the Eagles for sure. You know, you just wouldn't. I mean, maybe you could say the Byrds, but the Byrds didn't have that much of the Byrds were phenomenal, but they just didn't have a huge resume of music. You know, they had some good stuff, not a ton. Byrds were definitely, and of course, everything was influenced by the Beatles. So if we look at the Beatles as being ground zero, you know, without them, nothing exists anyway. That's that. You know, there's a Beatles, and you can make a case as Beatles and everything else, but in terms of the great American bands, the Beach Boys preceded the Beatles, and the Beach Boys were copied by the Beatles because the Beatles were very, very, very jealous of how good the Beach Boys were. So you can't take away that influence. But here's the difference. So I'm sitting here thinking, well, we have Van Halen and Metallica and the Eagles, and you can make a case. But to me, they don't transcend the greatness, like the super greatness that I use as criteria. So then I started thinking, well, this is kind of interesting because America doesn't necessarily have great bands, but we have great people. So we have Elvis, and we have Dylan, and we have James Brown, and we have Chuck Berry, and we have Roy Orbison, and we have Aretha Franklin, and we have Ray Charles, and we have Frank Sinatra. You know, we have these, you know, you have Bruce Springsteen. You have these singular individuals who are phenomenal performers. I mean, you know, what are you going to say? Elvis, Dylan, Hendrix, Springsteen, Sinatra. I mean, these are monumental artists, right? But they're pretty much individuals, as opposed to England is bands. And so when you look at England as individuals, you got Bowie, you got Rod Stewart, you got Elton John, but we have 20 times more spectacular individuals than England has, but they got 20 times more spectacular bands than we have.
Oh yeah.
So it's just it's just my own view of things. That's just an interesting separation. And look, plenty of people are going to go, well, you're Mount Rushmore of rock, Beatles, Stones, Who's That, Floyd, Queen. They're not my Mount Rushmore of rock. My Mount Rushmore of rock is the Ramones and the second, whatever. You know, whatever. I'm not going to get into an argument with people. They're going to do what they do. But America seems to excel in the individual thing. I think that's part of the American thing, isn't it? That exceptionalism, that individual, you know, everybody can make it on their own. And why is it, by the way, that American artists with bands call themselves out of their name? So in other words, the Beatles aren't Paul McCartney and the Beatles, or John Lennon and the Beatles. The Rolling Stones aren't Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. Queen isn't Freddie Mercury and Queen. But why is it Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band? Why is it Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers?
You know? Like why? Like even when Dylan was did the thing with the band, it was Bob Dylan and the band.
And the band. Yeah. Why is it that we need to put our name out there? But England doesn't. You know, now, will you find an exception? Yes. Elvis Costello and the Attractions and Ian Dury and the Blockheads, I guess. And by the way, what's really kind of fucks up my entire logic is that if you go back to Liverpool, to the Beatles period, You had Freddie and the Dreamers, Billy J. Kramer and the Codas, Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Jerry the Pacemaker. I was just going to say that one.
Herman. You had all these bands with these guys who were kind of named in the front. But anyway, it's a fun exercise to do, and I'm a sum of my guitar playing is just a sum of my love, my interest. I was a doo-wop fan. I'm old enough. I was born in '52. So I love doo-wop music. I love it, and I love blues, and I fell in love with blues, and blues became the thing. But when metal got into the shredder world, in the '80s, that was where it just lost me.
That was like an aspect of hard rock and metal that I didn't really get into myself either, because like at least for the past 30 something years I've always been a lyricist. I've been a songwriter, and I love melody. I love good hooks. I love you know what I mean, like everything that kind of grabs you again, like Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, even going back to like AC/DC, Def Leppard, you know what I mean, like those songs had hooks and they would grab you almost and demand your attention, whereas like to me the whole shred world was just like, oh yeah, I get it, you can play faster than a locomotive, but where's the hook, where's the melody, where's the emotion?
Yeah, and most of that stuff doesn't exist. And then people say, well, it's just an excuse because you can't play it. And I'll say, okay, fair enough. But, it didn't interest me enough to care because I didn't think there was enough there to be there about. However, do you not look at, of course they are. George Lynch is great, and Nuno Betancourt is fabulous. And Eddie Van Halen is great. But that's not my favorite players. I mean, Albert King and B.B. King, single note, Leslie West, these guys play one note, 2 notes, 3 notes, and they play them with enormous feeling. So I tend to gravitate towards that, but I'm older and I've had a lot more experience seeing a lot more artists. So if you grew up, if you're 10 years younger than me or 20 years younger than me, maybe you don't see the depth of artists that I had. But Bill Graham, God bless his soul, put on amazing shows with crazy bills, so you would see, look, Woody Herman is a clarinet player. And I saw the Woody Herman Orchestra open for Led Zeppelin. And that's got to be one of the strangest bills on the planet Earth. There's a picture of Woody Herman and his clarinet and a picture of Led Zeppelin on the same poster.
Right.
You would never see that. Could you imagine that today? Could you imagine Branford Marsalis opening up for Metallica? I don't think it would ever happen. Not to say that you wouldn't appreciate the excellence of Branford Marsalis, but the audiences would never accept it. You know what I mean? That's the point. The audiences get spoon-fed these bills. Bill Graham just put all this crazy shit on and mixed them up, and so you saw pretty interesting bills with a lot of different artists, but I was fortunate enough to see the Mothers of Invention and Frank Zappa and Moby Grape. Moby Grape may have been the best band out of San Francisco, maybe the most talented, certainly the best vocals, great songwriting, great players. Didn't make it like the Airplane did. Right. And certainly the Dead are the biggest of that whole era. Didn't happen for them, but they were probably the most talented. Buffalo Springfield, phenomenal band, made 3 albums, spectacular records, went on to create other bands that were very, very successful. Right. The Byrds begat the Springfield, begat Crosby, Stills and Nash, the whole Southern California. It's all interconnected. And if you're old enough to have been there during that whole explosive period from '68 onward, it gives you a very interesting perspective.
It was really interesting. One of the things you were talking about was these crazy bills, was that Bill Graham was very much a music fan. Like, he loved music. And again, one of the things I really appreciated out of it that I didn't really know in the past before reading his book many years ago was that his goal was to culture some of these audiences. And I remember reading somewhere where he was just like a huge Buddy Rich fan, and he was just like, these kids need to know who Buddy Rich is, so I'm gonna put them on a bill with the Dead and the Airplane. You know what I mean? And like, Buddy Rich would be up there just like melting their faces, and these kids had never even heard him, you know, but yet here he was on a bill with two of the biggest bands at the time, you know, and I kind of regret not being able to see that kind of eclectic pairing of bands, you know, in my teens or even in my, you know, later years. You know, you don't see that kind of eclectic, you know, check this out. You need to hear this, even if you haven't heard it before.
Yeah. Also, you know, when you're paying $3 for a ticket, it's not like you're mortgaging your house to go see a show, and if the opening act sucks, you know, like you're going to want to shoot yourself because you just blew, you know, like you just wasted hundreds. I mean, think about that. Think about the price of tickets, and so in those days the tickets were $3. I mean, when you went to the Garden to see Jimi Hendrix or the Rolling Stones in '69, the tickets were $6 at the Garden.
Oh yeah.
You know, $6, $7, $8. Beatles were $4.50 at Shea, I think, $3.50, $4.50, and $5.50. You know, when that's the case, you don't feel ripped off. I mean, these days you spend, you know, $400 on a ticket to see the Stones, and they can't even play, and you sit there and go, why? You know, I mean, they're like the worst band. You know, and it's feel terrible saying it because I'm a huge fan, but you know, they just can't play. So, you know, their fans, the Stones fans, are really old, you know, and they don't clap because they're afraid the lights will go on in the arena. So I think
I'm old enough to know what a clapper is, by the way.
I mean, God forbid they should have metal detectors at Stones concert with all the walkers that are used. The show would never go on. People wouldn't be in their seats until like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Dude,
you know?
It was the only
With
show.
well, you figure all the knee replacements, pacemakers, and walkers, you never get into the concert.
At that point, they're just like waving them in, like, come on,
yeah. Well, if you think about it, you know, the truth is, when I was 17, this is the part that really, so when people say, is rock dead? Rock's not dead. Okay, fair enough. Rock's not dead, but explain this to me. When I was 17, all the bands I went to see, Beatles, Stones, Who's That Fly, blah, 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 they were all 26. Think about this. I'm 17. Yeah. They're 26, 27. Thousands of these amazing artists, Dylan, Hendrix, Joplin, The Dead, you know, you name it, Pink Floyd. None of these guys are older than 27. When 27 is probably as old as they are when I was 17. So where's the thousands of 27-year-old rock stars right now? You can't name one.
No.
Because they don't exist. They don't exist. And so therefore, rock is at a crossroads right now as far as the new blood. It doesn't mean kids don't love it. It doesn't mean kids don't love Zeppelin. But it's just like, where's the market with all those young people? It doesn't exist. That's and for all the people that love rock and want to argue, you can't argue that point with me because I'll go, okay, go ahead, start naming them. Here I am. Name me all the great rock bands right now that are under the age of 27. Name them. Let's go.
Right.
Greta Van Fleet.
Right.
That's it.
Well, it's funny because there's so many other ones that are, you know, like I can think of a few of those bands that are, you know, kind of in their 20s, but even then, they're so underground that they can't make it on the road, you know, because it's, you know, they've got to live in a van, they've got to do 200 shows or whatever, but I just don't see what I saw when I was a kid. Like, you know, like I kind of miss seeing the rock star, you know, like when I go see Alice Cooper and I'm looking up at Alice Cooper and I'm going like he is playing some of the best shows of his career with a bunch of like 30 and 40 something year old musicians in his band. But then there's like the young band playing the Butthole Club and they look like they're about to die after 4 songs. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like sometimes that drive might not be there because they don't remember or they weren't around for that.
Yeah, they don't understand. We came out of an era where you played bars and you worked 5 nights a week and you played 4 or 5 shows a night. And you do that for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years like we did, and you got thousands of shows under your belt. So when people say, how does Twisted do it, or why are you guys so good? Because, if you still suck after 5,000 shows, you really have a problem on your hand. And I have a problem when guys come up to me and they go, man, you got to see my group, man. And I go, oh, how long you been together? 2 years. Oh, okay. How many shows you played? Well, we played about 50 shows. Oh, that's really good. 50 shows, huh? Yeah. I said, well, when you get to 500 shows, call me. I'll come down. 500 will never happen. I said, well, there's a good chance I'll never fucking see your band, because I have no intention of seeing your band without 500 shows, because you're going to suck, and I know you're going to suck. Therefore, I don't really need to waste my fucking time in the process. When Twisted's first 2 years of existence, we played almost 2,000 performances.
Right.
In the first 2 years, because we were working 6 days a week, 5 shows a night. You do the math, you'll see it.
Yeah.
Now someone said that's old fashioned, man. That's fucked up. You can't. The world isn't like that anymore. And I go, good. I don't need it. It's like, okay, so fine. You don't impress me. I'm only telling you what my standards are. I have very high standards. Okay, very high standards. You got it, and I don't want you to suck. I don't want you to waste my time. So.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is that one of the things that you just said that kind of hit a nerve with me in a good way was that you said somebody was like, that's old fashioned. It doesn't work that way anymore. My band and I, we've been together for probably about 6 years or so. We're just a local band. We don't tour. We're all in our 40s. But we play original music. We have a good time. But we've also come to this idea that okay, so even if it's old school or it doesn't seem to exist anymore, you make the rules for your own fucking band, so you can do whatever the fuck you want. So if that aspect of work or that kind of performing doesn't exist in the venues, make it yourself. Yeah. I just don't think that a lot of artists realize that you can do so much on your own without having to rely on a club or a venue or whatever.
Well, what that is you have to adapt to the times that are around you. Mm-hmm. So when bands come to me and they ask me for advice, and my first reaction is, fuck you, I never got advice, so why should you be so lucky to get some advice from me? And that's a horribly arrogant statement. So I've modified that statement a bit, because it's actually not true. I did ask one famous person for advice, and that's Tommy James from Tommy James and the Shondells. Mm-hmm. They had I Think We're Alone Now, and Hanky Panky, and Moni Moni, for those of you who or Crystal Blue Persuasion, a lot of hits.
Right.
And we did a show with them, and Dee had just joined the band, so it was 1976. And we were playing a corner bar in Long Island. Mm-hmm. Now you figure for us playing at this corner bar with 300 people in it in 1976 was a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. That was something we looked forward to. Right. But Tommy James had already had his superstar hit back in 66, 67, 68. So him playing a corner bar is not exactly the high point of his career. So he's probably, he's kind of like on the down or just trying to get a gig. And we're like, wow, we're playing with Tommy James. So we are walking downstairs. We had just finished our opening set, and he was walking upstairs. And I got him in the staircase, and I said to him, hey, man, give me some advice. And he goes, okay. He said, always be good to people, because you meet the same people on the way up as you do on the way down. And you want to make sure that people treat you well. Now, that's pretty cool advice, and it's general advice for everything in the world, not just being in a rock and roll band.
Right.
It's just good advice. And so I did. Anyway, so I'm asked for advice. And after I finish laughing, I go, okay, here's the deal. If I was 20 years old today, I would simply look around at what my 20-year-old peers were doing, mm-hmm. and I would steal every idea that I saw if I didn't think of it myself, and I would copy as much as I could and try to find my own pathway, because you have to deal with the playing field that you're given. Mm-hmm. I mean, when my day, the playing field there was a lot of bars. You became a copy band. That's what you did, because gasoline was, 29 cents a gallon, and a house rental was $300 a week, mm-hmm. and truck rental was $25 a week, and house rental was $300 a month. Studio time was cheap. You can make demos cheap, and you made $150 a night playing bars 6 nights a week. So if you're making $900 a week and you're expenses and your rent is $300 a month for a band house, you'd make money. You can make money. So we had the economy, we had it all figured out on how to make money and survive the economy. Well, that today gas is $5 a gallon, and that house is for $3,000 a month rent. Everything has changed. So, what are you doing to adapt to the current climate that you have? That's what you have to do. You have to observe your playing field, and you have to adapt to it. So I have no doubt that if I desperately wanted to become a rock star today and I was 20, I'd figure it out. What we used to do is we used to look at other bands making more money than us and said, how are they doing that? Why are they making 500 a night and we're making 150 a night? Okay? So you figured, okay, they're making that money because their song list is better, their PA may be better, this may be better. So you just start you start kind of copying the ideas that you think it work. So if you're a 20-year-old guy now, a 20-year-old person in a band, and you're trying to figure out how to make it, well, there's other new artists that are 20, 21, 22, and they're having more success than you. Look at what they're doing. Is it their social media profiles? Is it their reach out program? Is it their merch sales? What are they doing you're not doing? Try to do what they do. That's the easiest thing you can do to try to break into the next level, because before you become the Beatles, you better be better than the band next door. Simple as that. And if you're not better than your local competition, you're never going to make it. So while keeping your eye on the prize and the long term is wonderful, you need to look directly around. All this is addressed in my upcoming book, which will be out in September, called Twisted Business.
Yes, and that's actually what I was going to kind of segue. Great segue, by the way, because that was next on my list, was to ask you about that, because one of my questions that, I've been doing my blog now for about 12 years, and I get asked a question sometimes by younger musicians and artists, and their question to me is it worth it for me to try to pursue being a rock star or a full-time musician? And my answer to them, first off, would be like, I'm not an authority on this, but there's a difference between being a full-time musician and a rock star. So, like, if you want to be a rock star, I would assume that, kind of like what you were talking about. Like, I kind of look at that with Twisted, is that you guys kind of looked at other bands and say, okay, we're going to nab that, but we're going to do it better. Okay, we're going to take that from them, and we're going to do it better. And it's almost like you create this hodgepodge of just, it's like Legos. You just take in a little bit, piecing them all together, and then eventually you're the biggest toy.
Well, I do motivational speaking and keynote speeches to entrepreneurs, and I say, and what I say to them, which applies to the music industry especially, is that why do you become an entrepreneur? You become an entrepreneur for one of two reasons. You either thought of something that nobody in the world ever thought of before, and you're willing to risk everything you have to get it to the world, to show it to the world. You're willing to risk everything. Or there's something that pre-exists, but you think you can do it better, and you're willing to risk everything. So in a rock band, there's a million rock bands. So that just means you have to believe that you're a better rock band. You have to believe you can do it better and that you're willing to sacrifice. The truth, well, it used to be true. I don't know if it's true anymore, but no musician I know who knows how to read music is a rock star, and no rock star I know knows how to read music. So
I can't read a note, man, and I'm not a rock star.
So we're busy becoming rock stars. They're busy becoming musicians. I wanted to become a rock star, and I became one, for better or worse. And I can't read music. I don't know anything. I know no music theory at all. I just figured it out. I just kind of like I just listened to records and hung out with people and learned how to do this, that, and the other thing, and then became adept at keeping a business together. And that's how it worked for me.
Well, that's kind of the same concept, right? Like, as you were talking about, like, how to decide on being a band and what level. Is that as a musician, you kind of do the same thing, right? Like, guitar player, you're like, okay, show me that little piece. Okay, I'm going to learn that little piece. Okay, now I'm going to put these two pieces together. Great, now I've got a solo. But you don't have to read a lick of music, I didn't want to play classical music. I wanted to play AC/DC, and so like my guitar teacher told my parents, he's either gonna want to be Twisted Sister or he's gonna want to be, a classical guitar player, and I don't see that happening, because he wants to be Twisted Sister and AC/DC and Priest.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's so to me.
Yeah, I know 100% what you mean.
Yeah.
And they make it digestible. Although, understand, AC/DC may look easy. You know, I think what you do is you need to you need to kind of become familiar with Chuck Berry first. Like Chuck Berry's the entree to all of it, to me, is Chuck Berry. He's easy to emulate. He's a phenomenal player, but he's easy to emulate. And once you get that feel, then you can understand for sure AC/DC. I mean, for sure, AC/DC was complicated because Malcolm Young was a great guitar player, and he thought some really great parts out. I mean, Angus gives him all the credit, you know, for that.
Right.
But these guys are great players. I mean, they're a great band, and Ron Scott was a great vocalist, and Brian Johnson is a great vocalist, and they understood the right mix of things, and they're like the Grateful Dead of metal. You know what I mean? They're just who doesn't love AC/DC? I mean, everybody loves AC/DC. Have you ever heard one person say they don't like it? I've never heard anybody say they don't like AC/DC.
And I don't know that I necessarily trust anyone that doesn't
Who
like
doesn't like
AC/DC.
AC/DC?
Yeah, right.
I mean, they're like one of the food groups that you eat. You know, like, can you live without air? No. So you can't live without AC/DC. I don't care. I mean, the Beatles occupy a position. The Stones occupy a position. AC/DC occupies this freaking amazing position. They're just amazing. So yes. So you go from Chuck Berry, you kind of learn that stuff, and then you jump to AC/DC and you learn how to do that. You know, Priest is this archetype metal band, but they were kind of rooted, you know, in that blues kind of thing, and then moved in, you know, I mean, they were never a blues band, but they're easier to understand and digest as a metal band as opposed to jumping into Slayer, if you know what I'm saying. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of taking that leap, you know, you can go to Motorhead and Judas Priest, and Motorhead and Priest will then elevate your level. So when Twisted was in the bars, I was interviewing Rob Halford, you know, a couple of months ago for my podcast, which is the JJ French Connection on Apple Podcast One and Spotify. And I realized that as a cover band, Twisted Sister covered Ozzy, Sabbath, Dio era, Van Halen, Lou Reed, Bowie, you know, Alice Cooper, the usual gang of suspects.
Right.
But you know, we would do 2 songs of each, but with Priest, we did 7 Priest songs. We only did 3 AC/DC songs. We did 7 freaking Priest songs. This Priest had an outsized influence on Twisted. I mean, AC/DC and Priest, if you listen to Shoot 'Em Down, it's an AC/DC song, okay? If you listen. But if you listen to our Christmas record, which I don't know if you're familiar with the Twisted Christmas album.
Absolutely.
If you listen to that record was designed specifically to be a homage to all the bands that we loved. So White Christmas was done the way we imagined Iron Maiden would do White Christmas. And Silver Bells was done as we imagined AC/DC would do Silver Bells. And I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus was done as we imagined Judas Priest would have done it. And the opening track, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, was done like the Ramones would do it.
Right,
So we loved these bands, and we did it as a homage to the styles that we grew up with and emulated and loved. That's why they sound the way they do. So anyway, that's all. So every artist finds an inspirational fountainhead, and you have to do that first, and then you build on it. And then luckily, if you have the wherewithal and the luck to be at the right place at the right time, where you can learn your craft like we did, then you can take it to the next level. But you have to really kind of link onto something. I mean, look, when you talk to Jerry Garcia from the Dead, they were big folkies.
Oh, right.
You know, they
absolutely.
Jug band, folk. They
Bluegrass,
came from
they were all
that
into,
world. You know, and then they figured then they created a language out of that world. You know, the Byrds, they saw the Beatles. It's a famous story. Roger McGuinn and I think Chris Hillman saw Hard Day's Night and freaked out. Freaked out. You know, that's what did it for them. And they needed to own Rickenbackers because they saw them playing Rickenbackers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, I mean, but, you know, but we have this whole subculture in our music industry called alternative. And I never really understood what that phrase meant, because most alternative bands that I know, it's an alternative to learning how to play music. Like it's an alternative to rehearsing. It's an alternative to singing. Some of these guys sing like they make Lou Reed sound like Luciano Pavarotti. I mean, some of this, I don't know. I got a demo tape from a relative once. I won't maybe mention the band he was in, but he sent it to me really seriously that he thought this was a great piece of work, and it was amongst the worst shit I mean, you couldn't get a more drunk bunch of Animal House morons to put together a demo tape. And I called his mother, and I went, can I just ask you a question? This is like a funny frat joke, right? Oh, no, he's really serious. Really? What is he studying in school? Podiatry. My suggestion, become a fucking podiatrist, okay? Because, oh my God, And normally I don't want to be Simon Cowell, because what the fuck do I know, right? I can be wrong. I could be wrong, but I will not be wrong in this case. It was some of the worst shit ever made by people whose families were born in Eastern Europe. Oh God, it's fucking horrible.
Well, that's
horrible.
That's so funny that you say that, because like, I am like right at that age where I remember that whole cycle kind of flipping over, like where we started to get like the kind of like alternative thing coming in. But, at the time, I'm looking at a lot of these bands, I'm going, oh, Soundgarden, great. They sound like Sabbath, I'm like Pearl Jam. Oh, great. They sound kind of like roots rock, oh, Alice in Chains. They're just kind of like a dark metal band. But then the first time somebody played me Nirvana, I was like, is this really what record companies are signing now? Like, these guys can't play. Like, these guys made the Monkees look like Yes. You know what I mean?
That's
like,
funny you should say that, because the Dolls were amongst the worst bands I'd ever seen. And they're like, oh, the Dolls. No, the Dolls, nothing. They were awful. I saw them, at the Mercer Arts. I mean, every week. Look, I went hoping they'd be good because my friends knew them. I kind of knew Johnny. Mm-hmm. And they looked great. I just was when I went to see them, I was really hoping they were great. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, God, this is what New York has produced after 5 years of the Fillmore East with the greatest musicians in the world coming through New York. This is the shit that's finally representing New York. Is this shit? That's serious? I mean, look, the Ramones may not have been the greatest band, but the Ramones had something different. They were melodic, They had a thing. The Ramones had a thing, and I've always liked them. They just had a thing. They buzzsawed it, but they knew exactly who they were. And Joey Ramone, as limited as his vocals were, worked for that band. Like it really worked. Where I just don't think David Johansen's voice is any good. So I have a problem with the Dolls. However, to be fair to the Dolls, I want to be fair, because I saw them many, many, many times. They did play one show in which they were particularly really good, and I was very happy for them. I thought, wow, they're getting better. But then I saw them shortly after, and they just sucked again. But they were really good on this one night. And I was at the Fillmore had reopened in December of '72. I don't know if you saw our documentary.
Oh, yes, I've seen it probably about 5 times.
Directed by Andy Horn, and Andy Horn actually produced that Doll show at the Fillmore.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it was Eric and the Magic Tramps, Teenage Lust, and the New York Dolls. And the Dolls were really good. I remember thinking, wow, they really got better. I'm happy for them. And then I saw them a couple months later, and they were awful. So, but they had a big hype. So you weren't a big fan of Nirvana, is what you're telling me.
Correct. Right.
You didn't think it was great. So, everyone comes to these things differently. How many people hate the Grateful Dead? A lot of people hate the Dead.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people. They can't listen to them. It's like a bunch of psychedelic drivel. My joke is I saw them 27 times. 26 times on acid, greatest band I ever saw. 27th time I went straight and said, what the fuck am I doing? This is the worst band on the planet. But I say that in the documentary. Now, it's an exaggeration. I say it for fun. They're a great band, but they lost me.
One of the things I was thinking about was, I'm sure, like, you've heard the story a million times, Twisted Sister, especially for a guy my age, 80s. Big turning point for me, but also a big saving point for me. I was the fat kid, I was bullied, and, just trying to get through that horrible stage of just being a kid. But, Twisted Sister was my soundtrack. That was my strength. And that was the case for a lot of people my age. So back in the 70s with Twisted Sister, did you ever envision that you could actually be part of a band that would make that huge of a difference in many young people's lives that would last this long?
I don't think in the middle of it you're aware, except that we were huge in the tri-state area. So by 1979, we were selling out 5,000-seat venues in Long Island that for cover bands. People don't even understand that. Club bands don't get it. But the drinking age was 18, which meant people who were 15 with fake proof, which was easy to make in shop class, which doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure everyone goes, "What's shop class, man?" But back in our day, you had print class, and you can make phony driver's licenses. Pretty easy. So everyone fake proof, and you got into these clubs, and there was thousands of kids, and the clubs were packed, and so we were able to. We already knew how to play in front of thousands of people. So the first time we played in front of 20,000 people is when we were playing on Long Island on an outdoor show. We did 20,000, 22,000. They shut a highway down because so many people showed up at this outdoor show. So we knew how to do that thing. But you still don't know when it's going to happen, where you're going to make the leap. You know, you're really going to make the leap. And finally, we kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's in the documentary. It's in my book. And then when it all exploded, I don't think I thought about it. I was too busy working and too busy trying to not be depressed over what I thought was the inequities of the music business, because I was always a business person.
Right.
So I had a whole different view of it. So I'm not surprised. I'm always humbled when people say this to me, because I can say that to a million artists. You know, I can say to Zeppelin and to, you know, all these, without you, you know, I saw you guys, blah, blah, blah. And I saw Cream and The Who open up for Wilson Pickett and Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, and nobody knew who they were. I mean, no one knew who Cream was.
Right.
And some people knew who The Who were, but nobody knew who. In fact, they called it The Cream on the bill. It was The Cream, and no one knew who the Cream were. And I think they did NSU and I Feel Free from the first record, because Disraeli Gears hadn't come out yet. So that was the first album. And The Who did I Can't Explain in My Generation, because they only had one album or two albums out. And, so I'm 15-year-old kid, 14-year-old kid, like, oh, my God, can you imagine your eyeballs, you know? Pete Townsend smashing gear, you know, Cream playing in front of you. Oh, my God. It was crazy. And that's how my dreams were made. So when I meet these artists and I go on, oh, my God, you know, it's like, you know, we recorded in Jimmy Page's house, and when I finally met Jimmy and Robert Plant, I had dinner with him. I'm like saying, you know, man, I was like front row at the Fillmore East when you guys first played in 1969. It's true. I saw Zeppelin as an opening act, and Zeppelin opened for Iron Butterfly, and I didn't go to the show to see Zeppelin.
Right.
I went to see Iron Butterfly. So I'm sitting front row, and this is one of those Bill Graham bills.
Right.
The opening act was a gospel group.
Wow.
Called Porter's Popular Preachers. And they did gospel songs for an hour. And it was fun, you know, but it was like If I Had a Hammer and We Shall Overcome, all this stuff. And then Zeppelin comes out and plays the first Zepp album. Ooh. It was so, you know, when you get to meet these guys, you get to meet Robert Plant, you have dinner with him, and you go, I got to tell you, I saw you as an opening act. But then Robert Plant says to me, well, you know, 1974, I was in the Hamptons with John Bonham, and we walked into this bar, and there's a band called Twisted Sister, but you know, these two guys were kissing on stage, and he saw Twisted Sister when we were playing the bars in Long Island. This is the last thing I expected to hear from Robert Plant. When I'm telling him, I was front row at the Fillmore East, man, I saw you, and he goes, yeah, well, you know, we were staying with. This goes back to a story that some girl told me in 1974 or 73. Out in the Hamptons, she says, "Oh, Zeppelin's going to come. A couple guys, Zeppelin's going to come down and see your band." Now, that's it is not a ridiculous statement. It's the Hamptons. It's the summertime. Possibly, there's some possibility that maybe this girl's not on Quaaludes, and not hallucinating this conversation. And I said to her, how do you know this? She goes, oh, because my girlfriend is fucking somebody in Bad Company's road crew, and they said that they're out here and they're going to come by. And this is the story. So I don't believe it necessarily, and I never heard back. I mean, I remember that day I said, did anybody see anyone that resembled two guys from Led Zeppelin, you know? And anyway, turns out Plant saw us. So before I could tell him I saw him, because this guy says, by the way, Robert, this is J.J. Twisted Sister. Oh, my God, back in the day, you know, it was me and Bonzo were out in the Hamptons. Now, in those days, me and my original lead singer, not Dee, the first singer, we used to be chained together, dog collars.
I remember watching that.
We played the medley and kissed during the Bowie medley. That's how we got laid. Girls freaked out, and they needed to have sex. It's great. What a concept.
It's like a backwards concept, isn't it?
Oh, you tell me we're going to get laid looking like this, I'm all for it. You know?
That's amazing.
God knows I would be horrible at a dating app. I've never dated in my life. I wouldn't even know what to say. I really wouldn't know. So, but anyway, so girls would go crazy. There were groupies everywhere. You know, this is before AIDS. All you had to worry about were babies back in those days, and gonorrhea. Two small issues. You didn't worry about dying. So, you know, there were groupies everywhere. Anyway, so Plant goes, yeah, we saw these. We got, and I said to him, you saw me? You saw me? You saw me? That was me. That was me. And then, you know, and then I said, you know, when I saw you at the Fillmore, that first time I was doing a drug deal. I had 5 pounds of weed in a shopping bag. And I was standing out of the marquee of the Fillmore, and the guy never showed up. So I had, yeah. And by the way, just to put this in perspective for all you newbies out there, weed in those days was $150 a kilo. So $300 bought you 4 pounds of weed. Right? Oh, 4.5 pounds.
The good old days.
Like $300. So I had I think 2 kilos in a shopping bag waiting for some guy to show up, and he didn't. And someone said, "Hey man, front row seat, Iron Butterfly." I went, how bad could it be? It's freezing out. And I got 5 pounds of weed, so I'll smoke my way through and I got a DeVita. Like, how fucked up could you know, like, how bad could it be? So I go in, and so anyway, I'm telling Robert, yeah, I had 5 pounds of weed, and I'm passing joints all over the place. And Robert goes, that was you. I couldn't fucking breathe. I couldn't breathe. There was so much pot. That was me. So sometimes when you meet your heroes, you have some funny conversations.
You know, that's amazing because, you know, again, to kind of humble you or whatever, is that, you know, you've been a hero of mine for, like I said, since I first saw you play guitar. It was that yellow and black pointy guitar. I don't even remember what it was. A Guild. It was a Guild. That's what it was. Yeah.
You know why I had that guitar?
Why?
I'll tell you. Okay, so here I am playing Les Pauls, going back to I bought my first Les Paul in 1970.
Right.
So here I am, 1984. Twisted Sister breaks big, right? One of the biggest bands in the world. 84, MTV, everything, you know, great. I go to the first NAMM show. You know what that is? That's the National Music Merchants. That's where all the horror musicians go to get all their free shit.
It's always like out in LA or something like that. Yeah. Anaheim.
So I got into Anaheim, and Twisted Sisters exploded. 2 things happened at the show, at the NAMM show. Number one, I walk into the Marshall room. For people who don't know about Marshall amps, they are you have to play a Marshall or you're not a heavy metal band. End of story. Everyone has Marshall stacks. It's just the way it is. I don't care what else. You have to have a wall of Marshalls behind you. That's standard operating procedure in a heavy metal band. And we've been playing Marshalls for years. And Marshalls was a British band, but their American importer factory was in Long Island, so we knew them because we would go and get our amps fixed there or get stuff directly from them because they were kind of fans of the band. They knew us really well. We knew them. Marshall was famous to never give anybody anything. That was it. They would never give any band anything. They were really famous for that. You just buy it and we'll sell it to you at wholesale, but you buy it. And Jimi Hendrix is famous for saying, I don't want free gear. I just want to make sure that you have gear available to me anywhere in the world I play. Right. And he plays Marshalls. Okay, so I walk into the Marshall booth and it's like, JJ, man, wow, we're so proud of you guys. You know, local guys, thank you, man. And you guys are so big, man. We kind of did a survey and and they said, that the three top bands in the world were AC/DC, Van Halen, and Twisted Sister, and because you guys are local, we're giving you 6 stacks. Okay?
Oh, that's amazing.
So Marshall gave us 6 stacks at that show. However, at that same show, I walked into the Gibson booth thinking, well, J.J. French, play Les Pauls since 1970. This is my time. I'm going to get like a ton of guitars. And I walk in to the booth, and a guy comes up to me, can I help you? I said, oh, yeah, J.J. Twisted Sister. So what kind of arrangement, man? Because, I've been playing Les Paul since 1970. And he said to me, where do you live? I said, Manhattan. He goes, 48th Street? I said, of course I do. He says, well, they got good deals on 48th Street.
Slammed.
Yeah, go down there. You get good deals. I went, are you? So I was really angry, really angry. And I was walking down another aisle, and I ran into a mutual friend of mine who was with the president of Guild Guitars. Mm-hmm. And they go, you look upset. I said, upset? Fucking, do you believe that Gibson refused to give me Gibson? I've been using Les Pauls, and Gibson refused to give me J.J. French, Twisted Sister, three guitars. Are you fucking kidding? And the guy from Guild went, that's ridiculous. I'll give you all the guitars in the world. And that's how I became very close to Mark Johns, and that's how I had the Guild guitars.
It was so funny because that guitar, when I saw that, to me, that was like the holy grail of guitars. But so when my dad presented me with like the Blue Burst Westone, I was like, this will do.
Yeah, well, look, before I bought my Telecaster, I had all sorts of shit. Like at least you probably had a guitar that played. We had Sokovas and Kents, these companies you probably never heard of, made in Japan with a million toggle switches and buttons on them, and they were awful guitars. And that's how we started playing. I think I bought a Hagstrom bass. That was my first instrument, was a Hagstrom bass, and then my parents had no money, and so I couldn't rely on them to give me money. So I started dealing weed, and that's how I started making a lot of money, and started buying guitars and amps and everything. So I was 50 years ahead of my time, since marijuana has just been legalized in New York State, but I was a visionary.
You were a fish. I love that.
I was a drug dealer way back in 1967. I was way ahead of you guys, man. 55 years ago, I pioneered. I could have told you 55 years ago to legalize it. You didn't pay attention to me. So I started selling weed and started making money really fast. I started making a lot of money really fast. I said, what am I going to do with this money now? I'll just buy gear. Because my idea was not to become, like Rico Suave, become like a big deal. That wasn't the key. The point was to buy gear, have money to go to shows, and buy stereo equipment, buy albums, and keep enough drugs on me to be high 24 hours a day for 5 years, which I did a great job at all of that. Of course, I dropped out of school, which was a decision I made, and my mother was pissed. And the day I dropped out with 2 months to go in my senior year, that was the political era at the time. It was crazy. Like you have to have been through it to understand it. But the Kent State kids were killed, and there was anti-war demonstrations. Unlike today, where you could argue that half our audience likes Trump and half hates him, like an equal measure, like half and half. Back in my day, everybody hated the war.
Right. Everybody
hated Richard Nixon. Everybody hated Lyndon Johnson. So you could stand up in front of 400,000 people and go, the war sucks. And everybody will scream, the war sucks.
Right.
So that was the era. And I made a proclamation to my mother when I dropped out of high school. And she goes, what are you going to, she almost said, what are you going to do with your life? But she didn't say it like that. But she's basically like, what are you, fucking crazy? What are you going to do? And I said to her, the quote was, don't worry about me. I'm going to become a rock star. Because it just sounded really good. I just needed to shut her up. What do you mean? Don't worry about me. I'm becoming a rock star. I was like, oh, fuck. I just put my foot in my mouth. I better become one now. Moron.
Well, how did your mom react when you actually became one?
Unfortunately, she passed away in 74. So
I'm sorry to hear that, man. Yeah.
And my father died the day Stay Hungry went platinum.
Wow.
So I have a photo. I knew the record was selling well. We were in the middle of a tour. I had the record label make him an album and ship it to him, and a photo was taken of him holding it a week before he died.
Oh, that's bittersweet. Yeah.
He kind of knew. My mother never knew. She never knew. And we're not religious, so I'm not going to sit there and go in heaven or whatever.
Right? Yeah. Neither am I.
Yeah. I'm basically an atheist. I'm an agnostic, which is an atheist with a fallback. So I'd like to think. Listen, they may not be here in body, but they're in here in spirit and soul. That never leaves you.
Oh yeah.
In fact, John Lennon's effect on people will be lasting hundreds of years, like Beethoven's. I mean, you leave lasting artistic impressions behind, like great painters, and you will inspire people for hundreds of years. So you don't have to be here physically. The job you've done is enough.
Oh, absolutely.
And when I hear what you say to me you said very nice things about what we meant to you. And those are the most humbling comments. I have emails from people. I've collected them over the last couple of years. Man, you don't know what you guys did. You don't know what your songs meant to my life. You don't know what your lyrics meant to me. You got me through tough times. How do you remain cynical when you read stuff like that? You realize, wow, it was meaningful. It really meant something. So when I meet my idols, I tell them, I said, man, like when I think of the greatest shows I've ever seen, and I've seen ridiculously great shows, but the most ridiculously great show I think I saw was a night that I didn't expect to be particularly great. It was just, I saw Leon Russell, Mad Dogs and Englishmen at the Fillmore, and it may have been the greatest show I ever saw. And I saw Hendrix Band of Gypsies and the Stones in 69, 72. The Stones in 69 and 72, and Zeppelin in 69 and 70, 71, 72, arguably were the greatest rock bands ever that I ever witnessed. Hendrix was, twice I saw him. Once he was terrible. Once he was the best I'd ever seen. So I've seen some amazing shows, and those shows inspire me. So I would go home. I go to the Fillmore, come home at 4 o'clock in the morning, put a guitar over my shoulder, and pretend to be whoever I saw that night. Jimi Hendrix, or it was the guitar player from Pacific Gas and Electric, is a band you probably never heard of, or Henry Vestine from Canned Heat, the band Canned Heat, or Eric Braun from Iron Butterfly. I mean, I could just, I saw the Allmans' first show ever in New York, opening for the Dead.
I'm a huge Allmans fan.
That show was Allman Brothers, Love, and the Grateful Dead. For those people who don't know who Love is,
great band.
Made a lot of good records, but one of their albums, Forever Changes, is generally considered one of the greatest albums in 1967, and that year was a year full of great albums. The Doors debuted in 67, Hendrix debuted in 67, Procol Harum debuted in 67. There were some ridiculously great records, Light My Fire came out in June. Purple Haze was released in April, but didn't really hit until September. Think about it. We got the debut of the Doors, debut of Jimmy, Sgt. Pepper, the summer of 67, except that John Lennon will tell you that his favorite song of 1967 was Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, which he said was the best song of the year. When Lennon tells you that's the best song of the year and they just released Sgt. Pepper, you got to pay attention to that shit, okay? Plus, Pink Floyd released Piper at the Gates of Dawn, arguably the greatest psychedelic record ever made. I mean, oh my God, it's crazy. I mean, that album, I don't know if you're a Floyd fan or you go back to Syd Barrett era.
Yeah, I'm a huge Floyd fan, actually. Yeah.
Did you listen to Piper at the Gates of Dawn?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I mean, of course, I'm more partial to, the Gilmore, like Uma Guma and stuff like that, though. But I feel like the older I've gotten, the more I've been able to appreciate, not just Syd Barrett's era of Floyd, but like even his, solo album, Madcap Laughs, things like that,
Yeah.
I mean, that spawned the whole genre.
Yeah, and that's a great solo record, but you have to really be into him to understand that record. And he was fucked up. I mean, he really got himself fucked. In fact, I had tickets to see them with him, and he abandoned ship, a couple of months before that tour ended. So I never got a chance to see him with him. But I saw Gilmore many times, and I think Gilmore, talk about great guitar players. I think David Gilmour and Mark Knopfler are some of the best players ever. And Gilmour is just spectacular.
Earlier you were talking about about how the whole like versus the shred versus like single note type playing. Like, to me, Floyd was one of those bands that, as a whole, if you listened to it, it was just unfathomable how great they were. But if you picked them apart, member by member, and what they were doing, there was so much sparseness. Like the playing was so sparse, but yet, you could breathe between all the notes and stuff. But it was so much more than what they were as players. It's like their focus was the song, not like, look at me and how I can play. It was, what does the song call for?
What does that have in common with the Beatles, Stones, Who, Zepp, Floyd, Queen? It's always the song, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
With all those bands, it's always the song. But what's interesting about Floyd versus the Beatles, Stones, Who, Zepp, and Queen, when you think about Pink Floyd, is that the Beatles drummer, you know who he is.
Yeah.
You know it's Ringo, and
Ringo.
You know Charlie Watts,
Mm-hmm.
and you know Roger Taylor from Queen.
Right.
And you know Keith Moon from The Who, and you know John Bonham from Zeppelin, right?
Yeah.
And each one of these guys is different, and each one is amazing. But you would not necessarily have the name Nick Mason rolling off of your lips. Okay?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's one of the more interesting aspects about Pink Floyd, is that Nick Mason plays drums in one of the biggest bands in the history of the world, but you don't really think about him ever. Whereas you can't think about Zeppelin without Bonham.
Right.
You can't think about The Who without Keith Moon, and you can't think about the Beatles without Ringo, and you can't think of the Rolling Stones without Charlie Watts.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Why do you think that is? Do you agree with me?
Oh no, I totally agree, because one of the things I've talked about a lot, especially with my best friend James in North Carolina, is that he's one of those drummers that like you said, it never seems to make a list, never seems to make a top list or be the first person you think of when you think of a great drummer. But man, you listen to the swing that he plays with and say, like, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, or even even like Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, that kind of stuff. Like, when you listen to the stuff he's doing, it is so subtle and percussive, but at the same time, it's like he knows what he's doing. He knows the drums. He likes the drums. He's not banging them, and he's not in your face. But to be a drummer that sits so far back and lets the music kind of run the show, that if you pull him out, he's gone. If that makes sense, But with him there, he's part of the whole. He's part of that soundscape.
I think Mick Fleetwood is like that too, to me. Mm-hmm. He plays the right parts at the right time, always. Now Ringo, I think, is an amazing drummer.
Oh,
I mean, I think Ringo's phenomenal, and I think that the Beatles wouldn't swing without Ringo. And Mike Portnoy, who is arguably the greatest living prog drummer in the world right now, and we toured. He was our replacement drummer for AJ. Mm-hmm. We talk about this all the time. Ringo is amazing. He's absolutely amazing. He swings. If you look at the Ed Sullivan Show, you look at the live stuff, see how he swings, man. He pushes that band,
Oh, my gosh.
So the other thing, though, I've had this debate with people is who's more important to the band, Ginger Baker to Cream or Mitch Mitchell to Jimi Hendrix? And my contention is Mitch Mitchell was way more important to Jimi Hendrix than Ginger Baker was to Cream, because you could have used almost any drummer to be in Cream because they were a blues band.
I agree.
He was a great drummer, but you could have replaced but Mitch Mitchell, his jazz chops allowed Jimmy the space to be Jimmy.
Oh yeah, I mean, I even think about that. Like, if you go back, especially to let's say like the debut Sabbath album, you listen to what Bill Ward is doing as a drummer. Like, it's jazz all over the place. It's swing, it's groove, it's I mean, of course, later on he's considered to be a very influential metal drummer. But I'm like, man, go back and listen to what that guy's doing. It's jazz. And it's flavorful,
Because those guys grew up with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. Because their parents turned them on to Buddy Rich and to Gene Krupa. And that's how they learned. They learned from those. They learned from those guys. Most of those drummers. I mean, AJ learned from Gene Krupa.
Oh yeah.
You know, I think he took lessons from Gene Krupa. So and Buddy Rich, these guys were incredible. Think about this. My generation, we learned our guitar parts from Mike Bloomfield and Albert King and B.B. King and but now kids today who are 13, 14 years old have billions of guitar players to play. It's kind of like until the 4-minute mile was broken, nobody could run the 4-minute mile. Once it was broken, everybody can run the 4-minute mile. So right. Back in my day, when you listen to guitar players and bands in the 60s, they're kind of simple leads, because the most they could do was copy surf guitar playing, 5 years earlier or maybe rockabilly playing.
Right.
But guitar players now, man, they have a standard. They got Tommy Emmanuel showing them how to play, just because you turn on YouTube. And you get to see these guys like Oz Noy. I don't know if you're familiar with Oz.
Yes,
Oz is maybe, So Oz is a neighbor. He lives
oh,
the streets
that's awesome.
So he comes over a lot. I've sold him guitars. And Oz is amazing. But, I don't understand his playing. It's so out there. Like, it's too much excellence for me. Like I tell him, I usually go see Oz play in the last 10 minutes and he calls me up and goes, "Where'd you go?" I said, "I can only take so much excellence in such a short period of time." I don't even understand it. I don't. I interviewed Steve Vai recently and Nuno Betancourt and Joe Bonamassa. These are all spectacular players in my book, and I don't relate to Oz and I don't relate to Steve Vai's stuff because it's way too classically arranged, extraordinary stuff. Whereas Joe Bonamassa is a meat and potatoes blues player,
right? Yeah,
but just kind of taking it to a Stevie Ray Vaughan level, next Stevie Ray Vaughan level, like that. And Tommy Emmanuel, are you familiar with Tommy Emmanuel?
Yeah, he's a very kind of progressive kind of like he works with all these like odd tunings and things like that, and is very like technically.
He's insane. He's insane. Players.
I actually made it through 30 minutes into one of his shows here in Atlanta.
Did you really?
Yes.
I would love to see him. Did you? And what happened? Then you just got bored with it, or what?
No, it was kind of the same thing that you said. Like I actually had to go out into the lobby and kind of shake my head a little bit and just be like, I have no idea what the fuck I'm watching. This is just insanity to me. You know?
I saw Yngwie in 1980. And I was dating a girl who said, "Oh, we got to go see this guy Yngwie Malmsteen." So I go to a club called L'Amour, which is a famous rock club in Brooklyn. Where a lot of metal bands played L'Amour. We were the house band at L'Amour. So I go to L'Amour, and I'm sitting
L'Amour rocks.
The first song, I'm like, "Oh my God, this is ridiculous." Then the second song was, "Oh, that was like the first one," and the third song was, "Oh, that was like the first one." And by the fourth song, I had seen him play the same solo on 4 songs. That was incredible. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't the same solo, but it certainly appeared. So I didn't connect with it. Now, Yngwie and Twisted have played on a bunch of bills.
Right.
He's a spectacular player. It's just another, But it's funny. I was reading an interview with Yngwie, and he was very matter of fact about his playing, and he goes, in Germany I couldn't get arrested. I'm just another guitar player in Germany. I had to come over to America where you people thought it was fantastic. It's like you people heard all this classical shit and said, "Well, amazing." And I said, I'm coming from a place where everyone does that. But then you go to Nashville these days and you see the most unbelievable players in Nashville. I mean, Nashville really is the home of the greatest players. Anywhere you go, any club you walk into, there are amazing fucking players. Like, you are not allowed to suck in Nashville. If you suck, they take you out back and just shoot you and put you in a pit. Because, you see 13-year-old brother and sister teams sound like Faith Hill and Tug, and Clint Black and they're just they're. Tim McGraw, they're amazing singers and players.
Right.
This, by the way, it occurred to me, you could walk into a club in New York, before COVID, you could walk into any club in New York and any club in LA, and chances are you'd see a shitty band playing. And it didn't matter because they just brought their friends with them and they're all drunk and they're having a good old time. Right. But, basically, they suck. It's alternative, and they just are playing, and they all sound like Louie Louie by the Kingsmen, pretty bad.
Right.
But that's not the case in Nashville. In Nashville, every single club has players. So I was in there last time I was there. I walked into Roberts on Main Street, and there was a band playing in the window, like during lunch break.
Oh, yeah.
So just a band playing in the window. And the guitar player, was like blowing my mind. And I walked up to him and I said, I don't know if anyone else is paying any attention.
Mm-hmm.
I am. You're amazing. And he goes, thank you. I go, yeah, it's amazing down here. He goes, yeah, that's the problem. There's a lot of amazing players. Everyone's waiting for somebody to die in a famous band, Oh, I'll replace them. Great players. I write country music with a writer down there. I think Nashville is just great. And by the way, while I'm not a religious person, there's something to say about the discipline of the church in terms of artists, singers, players. When you get church bands, mm-hmm. they only take the best. They really do. I mean, all jokes aside, there's a discipline there that's crazy. And a lot of these great Southern rock players back in the 60s, they all came out of church.
Oh, I mean, listen to Greg Allman, Yeah. I mean,
among everybody. They're just all of those guys, They just came out of church, man. They were amazing singers, amazing players with real discipline. Like they really knew what the hell they were doing. Mm-hmm. And it's great to watch those guys play.
Absolutely, yeah.
Then you got the Motown crew, which is just another sick crew. Those guys,
discipline.
The Motown crew. Oh my God, what they played on 310 top 40 singles or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, forget about the fact that Berry Gordy built one of the most astonishing houses for talent that you will never see that talent again under one roof. You got Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Temptations, Supremes, Smokey Robinson, Martha and the Vandellas, Holland Dozier Holland that wrote 95% of the stuff, Smokey Robinson's stuff. You've got these players that are crazy. You realize that if you took the Billboard chart and you looked at the Billboard record chart from 1963 to 1967, and you took out all Motown and all Beatle and British Invasion, you'd have almost nothing left, except for the Beach Boys and the Four Seasons. You'd have nothing left. I mean, and by the way, kudos to the Wrecking Crew in L.A.
Did you see that documentary?
Yeah, I did.
One of the greatest fucking things I was when Carol Kay was talking about how she would be laying down bass parts for all these songs that would just blow my mind. And then she said, but she'd clock out at 5 o'clock and go home and make dinner for her kids. She's like, I never had to see the road, never had to see a bus. I just did my thing.
You did your thing. And then we had the Brill Building in New York. You know about the Brill Building.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
The Brill Building, that's where Paul Simon and Ellie Greenwich and Carole King and Neil Diamond.
Tin Pan Alley, right? Is that,
Yeah, Tin Pan Alley. And they just churned out song hit after hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. You know that there was a TV show called The Old Grey Whistle Test in England? Do you know about that?
Oh, yeah. I've seen some of my favorite footage off that.
You know how they got the name The Old Grey Whistle Test?
No.
So apparently, as myth has it, the Old Grey Whistle Test was at the end of every songwriting day at the Brill Building. The old guy, the black custodian guys would be cleaning up. You know what I mean? Like they'd be walking by Paul Simon's room and Carole King's room and Neil Diamond's room and Phil Spector's room and Shadow Morton's room and Ellie Greenwich's room and Lieber and Stoller's room and they'd be listening to the demos that they're making that day. And if they could whistle the song, that means it would be a hit because it was that memorable.
Oh,
it was the Old Grey Whistle Test.
That's amazing. I never heard that.
That's the myth of the title, the Old Grey Whistle Test. Yeah, if it passed the Old Grey Whistle Test, the song was a hit. So those guys, so the Brill Building is super famous. And, we can just go into this because, I mean, I don't want to, waste your time. But this is the musical history that, being a New Yorker you grow up with, you understand it. And if you love the music business, you were indelibly connected to it.
Right.
And if you were me, I absorbed it. So I had that whole period. Then I had the Fillmore East period, which was gigantic. And then Twisted started. And after that, I went to less shows because now I'm playing the shows. I don't have the opportunity to go see shows because I'm now playing it. So I've seen probably 2,000 artists, and I've played thousands with Twisted, so I've played an awful lot. So when people say to me, "Do you miss it?" I go, "Not necessarily." You know,
you've had your fun, man. You know, like you've lived a good life.
I did it, and it was fun to do it, but I'm kind of over a lot of it. You know, it takes a lot to get me to a show. I mean, my wife has to go, "I really want to see this artist," you know, and then I'll go. But I don't really miss it. And when we walked away in 2016, every year someone would say to me, "You miss it." And every time I go to a show, I walk into an auditorium or a venue or a coliseum, and if I missed it, I would be thinking, I wish I could be there. But my attitude is, thank God I don't have to be there. So that's how I think. I walk in and go, oh man, God forbid I have to stand on stage. Which I never, by the way, understood that mentality. Like I used to listen to interviews by retired football players, baseball players. Yeah, well, who's your favorite team? I don't really have one. What do you mean? You don't watch your games? No. Well, you don't go? No. Why? Because I did it for 30 years. You know? I don't need to see it anymore. So people find it hard to believe that I would say that I'm bored of playing in front of 100,000 people, which we could do tomorrow if we wanted to. Right. The band was together. We could, and there was no COVID. We played 100,000 people in Europe and South America. But I walked away from it having done it and been happy about it, and I do not miss it.
Well, you know, so I know one of the things you get asked a lot about as far as, you know, Twisted goes is, you know, people kind of go into, you know, Under the Blade, Can't Stop Rock and Roll, Stay Hungry and everything. And then anytime I've ever heard Come Out and Play addressed, it's usually with like some sort of like a negative connotation to it sometimes. And I actually went back and decided to give it a re-listen before I talked to you. And one of the things that I noticed about that album is that with the exception of a few, like one or two songs that I feel like were just kind of misplaced, as in like could have been on, say, like Stay Hungry or whatever, that album was a pretty big turning point for you guys as musicians. I mean, some of those songs were just, you know, I mean, just so well played. And I actually had to write, what was it? The Fire Still Burns. That could have been one of the greatest thrash songs. I mean, like, I'm surprised I haven't heard thrash bands covering that song. Like, so what do you think it was about Come Out and Play that people focused so much on their negative connotations instead of looking at things like that? Or like King of the Fools, like the guitar playing on that album in comparison to what was done on previous Twisted albums, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, like with Floyd. It's like you guys kind of, at least for me, on that song, said this is what's good for this song. And the guitar playing was so subtle, but so just like full, you know, like.
Yeah, well, there was one big problem with Come Out and Play. Had we not led with Leader of the Pack, had we led with Fire Still Burns, would have been a whole other story. The marketing is what fucked that record up, and it was a mistake. And we thought for sure, you know, we were under pressure to repeat, you know, because we had a monster album. So you're under pressure. And we made a mistake, which should have been The Fire Still Burns. It should have been a video, and it would have been ultra heavy. Oh, yeah. It would have been great. And we blew it, and that's really it. So that's in a nutshell what happened. It was colored by Leader of the Pack, which was misinterpreted and wrong. Right. It's really as simple as that.
It's a shame.
There's nothing more. Yeah, it's a shame, but I mean, it is what it is, right? So, you know, when the band finally crashed and burned and Love Is for Suckers, and we never thought it was going to come back. So the fact that the band came back in 2003 and had a 14-year run as one of the biggest bands in the clubs, in the festival circuit in the world, and we released the Christmas album, which became a hit.
Right.
I consider that to be our justification for our greatness. In other words, that was the thing that cemented our greatness. Had we not come back. I mean, think about this. You know, if the Beatles ended after Magical Mystery Tour without the White Album and Abbey Road, they would have been they would have ended with their Sgt. Pepper costumes, which were kind of like cartoonish,
right?
You know, less credible. It's like Elvis. Elvis turned it from the hippest guy in the world into a Macy's Day Float. Okay, is basically what happened. You know, a big fucking blown, fucking gigantic bloated piece of shit singing fucking pops. Like, I saw him in 72 and it was horrible because he was doing a Las Vegas shtick. But if he was the
Kung Fu
Elvis, If he was the 68, yeah, if he was the 68 Elvis, it would have blown my mind, but he wasn't. So what differentiates, I just wrote an article, a big thing in Goldmine magazine, the difference in Elvis, Sinatra, and the Beatles. And here's the difference. Elvis became a complete joke. Sinatra sustained his coolness all his life. He was as cool from the first record to the day he died. Never changed his clothes, wore the same fucking suit, just did his shtick. And in Vegas, is still the coolest thing that ever walked Vegas' earth. Okay, whereas Elvis again is a buffoon. The Beatles could have been in danger of buffoonery had they ended at Magical Mystery Tour, because that kind of like, that was a big disaster for them. The movie sucked. It was a dumbass movie. It would never have been released if Brian Epstein was alive, ever. It was a Paul McCartney vanity project. Never would have happened.
Right. Yeah.
But what saved the Beatles? The White Album, which was a brilliant tour de force of a double record. I mean, to this day, it is one of the most awesome records in the world. And people talk about Revolver, and I love Revolver. I love the White Album more, okay? I love the White Album. And then, of course, Abbey Road just did it, right? That's like the PhD performance. That just cemented the world. No one really talks about the Let It Be record that much as an afterthought. But the White Album and Abbey Road is what cemented the Beatles. Not that they were not the greatest band, not that they didn't have an unbelievable string of hits, but let's just be clear here. The Beatles were black and white on Revolver. They were Technicolor silly with Sgt. Pepper going into Yellow Submarine, going into Magical Mystery Tour, and then they come back to black and white again. If you think about it, the cover for the White Album is just nothing.
Oh yeah,
just White Album, and they basically said, take us seriously, man, enough, take it. And they delivered a record that was just mind-blowing. I mean, Revolver, look, Rubber Soul, we all know it began at Rubber Soul and went through Revolver and then eventually Sgt. Pepper, which may be the most overhyped record on the planet Earth. But I was 15 when Sgt. Pepper, no, I was 14. Sgt. Pepper came out. So I was buying Beatle records in real time.
Right.
All of you guys buy it as a historical statement. We bought these records in real time. I know exactly where I was when I heard Rubber Soul. I know exactly where I was when I heard Sgt. Pepper. I know exactly where I was when I heard the White Album. I know exactly where I was when I was listening when I bought Abbey Road. I bought those records, took them home, and had parties. So the Beatles benefited by the fact that they got back to business on the White Album and Abbey Road, and that cemented the reputation, whereas Elvis just kind of got buffooned out. People smirk when they mention Elvis. They smirk. Oh, yeah, that guy. They remember the white jumpsuit, the fat guy, the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and the fucking, karate moves. All that bullshit. Meanwhile, watch Jailhouse Rock or watch King Creole, watch those movies. Oh, my God. Watch the Elvis special, 68 comeback special.
Oh, my God. That's one of the greatest things.
Oh, come on. I mean, that's why I went to see Elvis at the Garden. I didn't expect to see the Vegas show at the Garden.
No, I would have wanted that. I would have wanted that comeback special. That's what I mean, because to me, that's definitive Elvis, at least in my opinion, as a music fan,
100%, man. He had everything in that special. He was as great as you'd ever want it to be. And, when you read about when they were filming the special in California, the president of NBC didn't know if he was making a mistake, because it was 68, it was the Beatles, it was the war, it was hippies. Nobody cared about Elvis at that point. Nobody cared.
Right.
And they were pitched this idea, and he said at one point during the afternoon, Elvis walked across in Burbank. He walked across whatever street that was to go to a store across the street to get a soda. And he's standing, and this guy's in his window overlooking, the avenue. And there's Elvis, and nobody's walking up to Elvis, and he's going, shit, does anybody know this guy? This is fucking Elvis Presley, right? And this guy's going, no one's walking up to him. Is this a mistake? think about that. I could see that. There's a risk. Give him a primetime special. But how great was he in that special? Oh, it's phenomenal.
I just love that.
So Elvis is great, but unfortunately he got fucking...
Well, so kind of with, like you said, when we were talking about the Come Out and Play thing, that tour was fucking massive.
Well, the production was massive. The tour didn't last too long.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Massive.
But the only thing I've ever been able to see of that is like just some grainy VHS bootleg on YouTube or something. Well, first off, like, what a fucking set list, man! Like, that's a Twisted Sister fan's dream. Like, when I saw that set list from that tour, I was like, how did I not ever get to? You guys are the one band that I love more than anything that I've never got to see live, ever. But like,
there's a lot of great DVDs out. Live at the Astoria is maybe my favorite.
That's a great. Yeah, I have that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible stuff. And to give you an example, like in Europe, the way they put on concerts and festivals in Europe is so much better than they do in America, at least for heavy metal.
Oh, absolutely.
Like heavy metal is an afterthought here in America, but in Europe and in South America, it's the biggest. I think it's probably still the biggest in the world. Still bigger. I believe in Asia too. I believe these festivals are just gigantic. But one afternoon we played a show in Holland. It was the Arrow Festival, and this is the kind of bill that if you're if you love this kind of music, imagine this in one afternoon for 80 euros. Okay, you had Kansas, REO Speedwagon, Motorhead, Journey, Whitesnake, Twisted Sister, Def Leppard, and Kiss in one day. In one afternoon.
Dude, give me that ticket now.
Yeah, get that ticket now. So you had 2 stages on either side of these fields, and each band played an hour. And so because each band played an hour, they played their best songs. Can you imagine? Our Whitesnake, our Journey, our Motorhead, our Twisted, our Def Leppard, our Kiss. It was pretty freaking amazing. Those things don't happen in the United States. And that particular show, we played with Kiss the first time, and we had a 4 p.m. slot. And unfortunately, Dee decided to take the last plane out of New York, which would have gotten him into Amsterdam at 8 in the morning. And then there was a 2-hour drive to get to the festival, which is on the other side of Holland. It was a 4-hour drive.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was in Nijmegen. So the band arrives early the day before, and Dee is supposed to arrive that morning in Amsterdam. The problem was that Dee was at JFK, and he took an Ambien on the plane and woke up 7 hours later and said to the guy next to him, "Wow, man, that flight was amazing. It didn't even feel like it moved." And he goes, "It hasn't. We've been on the tarmac for 7 hours on hold."
Oh my God.
So the flight doesn't arrive until 2 in the afternoon or 1 in the afternoon. And so we were all sitting, we were wearing T-shirts and jeans thinking, well, we're not going to get to the show because there's no way Dee can make it now to the venue unless you hire a helicopter. Well, when you hire a helicopter in Amsterdam, you hire the helicopter. In Holland. It's the only fucking helicopter.
You got the one.
And they got the helicopter, and it landed right behind the stage 10 minutes before 4 o'clock. And we wore T-shirts and jeans. When people say, "How come you stopped wearing makeup?" Because we had no idea that we were going to be playing. So we ran up on stage in T-shirts and jeans, and we did the show. And the next morning, in the concert, in the center section of the national paper in Holland, they did a review of the whole festival. It's great. All the bands are great. The only photo was of Twisted Sister, and it said the only band to perform a near religious experience was us. And those are the kind of reviews that you cherish because you know that you've really done a great job when you do that. So
absolutely.
we had a great run. We had an amazing run of festivals, and I'm very, very grateful to it. But I have a new life now, and like I said, I have a book coming out in September. I have my podcast, The JJ French Connection. I'm having a hell of a good time doing it. Meanwhile, Dee's doing his thing. He has another record coming out.
Yeah.
I know that Dee and Eddie are doing a tribute to Leslie West. They're doing Theme for an Imaginary Western. I think Mark Portnoy is playing drums on that. That's happening. Eddie does his stuff. Mark has a show called Area 22. It's a cable TV show. Mike Portnoy is in every band ever known to mankind simultaneously on the same day.
Exactly.
I mean, Mike Portnoy does play for the Beatles, Stones, Who's, Floyd, Queen, AC/DC, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. Oh, and Sons of Apollo, and and Shattered Fortress. And every other project. Portnoy is a Rolodex of insanity. I don't even understand. I talk to him. I go, "How the hell do you even keep a record of this? How do you do this?"
The only other musician I know is that busy is Warren Haynes. Like that guy. Like I saw that guy play with the Allman Brothers, Government Mule, and Phil Lesh, all in one night, and I was just like.
Yeah. Yeah, he's another one of those guys.
And he cracks a smile the whole night, you know? And I'm just going like, how do you even, like my wife was just like, he must be the busiest guy in rock right now. You know?
Well, he may be. I could tell you Portnoy is so insane. I love Mike. He came in, he loved AJ. He was the best thing in the world to come in and do it. He was the most incredible professional on the planet. What a sweetheart of a man. You know, just a great guy and a phenomenal drummer and did AJ proud. And he's wonderful. And to my fellow band members, to Dee and to Eddie and to Mark, you know, I mean, without those guys, you wouldn't even be interviewing me, right? Because you're the sum total of the people around you. So they've always been great, and there's great supporters when it came to performing between the lines as a sports analogy. You know, what happens between the lines is all that matters.
Oh, absolutely.
What happens between the lines with those guys are some of the best rock and roll ever played, and I'm very proud.
JJ, this has been just such a thrill for me, and the fact that you took enough time to talk to this punk ass kid who has a blog and a podcast, like I wish I could go back.
You're not paying me? Excuse me.
Well,
I thought. Did you write $5,000?
Well, do you take Venmo, PayPal?
We take everything, man. I take Bitcoin.
I take Bitcoin.
I take Ethereum. I take NFTs. You name it.
Are you fucking kidding? I'll take a traveler's check.
Fuck well, God knows. Those are the days. When I went to Europe in '71. Take your American Express traveler's check.
Just fill your wallet with them, right?
Oh, my God. Anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, man, for being a fan.
JJ, thank you so much for just being you. And this was, like I said, this was a real thrill for me. And so I really appreciate it. Talking to you is fantastic. You were everything and more than I hoped you'd be. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that too, Don. You take care of yourself and good luck.